Hello everyone, welcome to Fuse Room. I'm Alberto. In this video we're going to talk about Sonimus Satson CS. So the quest for a SSL style channel strip started a couple months ago when you asked me to find something that was not expensive, that sounded great, that could be used on any DAW, and that was reliable, wouldn't crash, and also was light on the CPU. Now I decided to add one more request, which comes from my own pool of requests. This plugin had to have some mojo, but there had to be a lot of ways to control it. I wouldn't want something that would just assault my DAW with a lot of analog mojo that I couldn't take out. So, as usual, I ventured into the dimension of the doomed and came back with Satson CS by Sonimus. So this is an SSL style channel strip that has modules. A lot of people now use this format and people really like it. There's 3 modules at the moment that you can use and they are interchangeable in order. Signal flows from left to right, there's a preamp, there's EQ, and there's compressor. Now, as usual in the first part, we are going to take a look at how the plugin sounds. And please take 2 seconds to realize how depressing what I said just is. Done. Before we start, full disclosure. My music education programs are and will always be on these channels 100% free. My interest is in giving you concepts that work no matter the tools that you want to use. I want to keep you curious, motivated in exploring new things and make your music better and more fun. However, Sonimus wanted to help, and they decided to give me referral codes that you can use when you want to buy their plugins. If you buy their plugins through my codes, I'm gonna get some financial support. So that is pretty cool. Alright, so I propose that once we take a look at what the modules are, the presets that everybody knows about, and the options, including GUI scale and oversampling, which settles at ×2 by default, let's take the modules out and just work our way through one by one. We're going to do a linear analysis first with the spectrum in frequencies from 0 to 22 kilohertz something, and then we're going to do an harmonic analysis where we drive a 1 kilohertz sine wave into the plugin and see what kind of behavior we get. So when things are completely unloaded and empty, we get a pretty linear response up to Nyquist, I would say, where frequencies kind of drop down as a sort of a low pass filter. Then we load in the preamp module. And now we have the main feature being a saturation button. So when we engage sat, we have these sort of bump in the lows, dip in the mids, and a little bit of a low pass at the extremes. We have filters, which behave as expected. And we have a fat mode, which changes the analog mojo sort of style, right? We have crosstalk as well, which I'll talk in detail in a bit. And then we have a main fader that, pretty visible, pretty nice looking, with the GC, gain compensation button. So when we engage GC and we go up and down, the gain stays matched, stays the same. We only change the driving the console kind of style. So when we disengage GC, then we have both the mojo and the actual drive. So the VUs can be set from 0 VU being -20 dBFS up to -12. I like -18, they're fine. So let's get to the harmonic analysis of this module. We're sending a 1 kilohertz sine wave at -36 dBFS, and when we crank the fader up with gain compensation turned on, we can see that the harmonics change in quantity and quality, and when we engage FET, they also do. Up until 24, which gets with FET kind of a lot of harmonic content. Now let's take a look at the EQ module. When it's completely off, it's pretty linear up until the Nyquist frequency. When we engage it, there's a sort of a 2 Hz high pass. We can change the high pass and low pass. We have a gain knob, which is pretty linear, and everything else is on par with what you would expect with an SSL style EQ. There's a low shelf or bell without Q. There's a low mids and high mids with variable Q, which also changes in gain, as you can see with the extremes. And again, you can turn the shelves into bells, which is a very typical feature of the SSLs. The typical ranges and tricks you'll see are possible with this EQ, but there is no harmonic content. So this is a pretty clean module, even if we drive the intensity of this sine wave close to 0 dBFS. Now, let's go to the compressor module. The compressor here looks more like a bus compressor rather than the dynamic section from the channel that SSL has, but because you can go dual mono and you have a mix knob to select how much you want to inject in terms of compression with the sidechain as well, I guarantee you can use it in channels and it sounds fantastic in combination with EQ, what I would expect from the channel that SSL has. So obviously there's amount, makeup, attack release, and the ratios, 2, 4, and 10, and we cannot go in between. Now the thresholds are different. So when we go to 2 to 1 and we get some compression and we see the harmonic content that we're generating, when we go to 4 to 1, all of a sudden we no longer have compression. This is because the ratios 2 to 1, 4 to 1, and 10 to 1 have different threshold levels. So the same threshold that might be compressing X amount of dBs at 2 to 1 will probably not work on 4 to 1 because the thresholds are getting higher and higher to get engaged by the signal. So if we crank it at 40 dB and then we go to 2 to 1, we can actually see the different behavior in harmonics. And these change with the amount of compression, with the type of attack, with the release type, obviously affecting how the sign gets, influenced by the pushing down of the compressor, and obviously the sidechain itself and the mix knob acting as a sort of a balance between dry and wet. So this compressor has a lot of mojo in itself, and the whole thing combined, especially with the fact that, again, I can have a stereo link, but I can work in dual mono or mono, make it very viable in the context of a channel, but also in context of busing or entire mixes. Now let's talk about crosstalk, which is usually a negative term or something that engineers and manufacturers have tried and managed to really reduce in the last years. When you have an analog piece of equipment, because of the electrical current flowing in, magnetic fields being generated by all the components, and maybe line coupling as well, you have a sort of a bleeding of a dialogue between nearby audio signals. So part of one audio signal spills into the other and vice versa, creating this mass of chaos called crosstalk. Now again, in the years, this was really reduced and the performance of the modern analog equipment is way better than what we had in the 50s. I don't know, I wasn't there, but they told me. So here, Sonimus is bringing part of that concept into a more controllable, I would say, luckily, behavior. So let's take a look at how Satson handles crosstalk. You engage it with vintage or modern, and then you engage saturation. And you can see right away that left and right channels are now different, but also the frequency response is different than before. If you go to modern, the differences are still there, but they're milder. If you go fat, and then you also engage the gain knob, you can see that these differences carry over in the changes in drive, sort of. So vintage and modern crosstalk, even if different, have this approach that allow you to sort of break loose of the coherence that digital has between left and right channels. Now, I personally sort of never use it. I like to check it from time to time to get that sort of maybe that sort of magic thing that kind of makes things better. But I like to handle my stereo imaging through different processors. But it's great that it's there, and it's great that it doesn't do that much, because usually a lot of processors that like to have fun with all analog equipment make too much of a fuss, and we've spent years getting rid of things like this, and now we're getting back to them. Who's to blame? I don't know. So now that we're done taking a look at the modules, let's finally go to hear how these plugin sounds. This song is going to be a perfect example of how Satson CS sounds. It already has outboard on in parallel. There's compressors, there's EQs, but we're not gonna take a look at them. Why? Because we don't care. All we wanna have is some sort of interaction from a mixing template in hybrid mixing, so that we can actually hear how the sound develops from what Satson CS does into a more viable and real world sort of session. So what I propose we do is let's take a listen to the session as it is now. Second chorus, middle 8, final chorus. So as you can hear, it sounds pretty thick, saturated in a way without being too much. But, you know, on the verge of being a very sort of a powerful West Coast sort of LA kind of rock thing from a singer-songwriter approach. Now, I did that obviously on purpose. Now, let's take a look at some instruments and tracks in here, and you're gonna see how the typical tricks or behavior that you would expect from an SSL channel are actually, you know, in effect. So let's start from the acoustic guitars, which have a pretty unique footprint that I really like. So here I've used two instances of Satson CS. There's two left and right acoustic guitars, and let's hear how they sound without the whole channel strip and then with. I really like how this whole channel strip brings out the honey in the acoustic guitar. I kind of imagine that the acoustic guitar has sort of a honey wood color. I don't know if it ever had, but it's just talking about some sort of Venice Beach kind of, you know, sunset behavior. I don't know, it has that air, that sound. So it's really cool. It's something that I would expect an SSL to do in terms of bringing the sound forward. You can see that I've used the compressor at like 5%, just bringing in some more density to it, and it kind of reacts very well as if it was a channel compressor, you know, the dynamic section. There's typical moves of acoustic guitars on SSL. There's me high passing at 80, but also cranking up 15 at 120 Hertz. So the Helmholtz resonator is kind of getting emphasized by my move, but I'm cutting the extreme lows, and I'm also taking out some 0.17, so 170. So the whole interaction between the bands is exactly why SSL style EQs work so well. And you can get very extreme in your moves and it still sound very musical. So I'm getting a 1.61 and getting the core harmonics like 8 dBs. It's kind of a lot if you think about it. 6 dBs at 5.72, and then there's kind of a lot of compression at 2:1 though, 0.3 release, kind of an open attack at 15 milliseconds and just 5%. I'm not using that much saturation, but I'm still cutting again at 80 Hertz. And they're not identical. If I had to say something else about it, look at the fact that I didn't equalize the, and actually even compress the other acoustic guitar the same way that I did with the first one. So this is also why this actually sounds a bit more, you know, singer-songwriter, open, you know, not too coherent, which would be a little bit maybe sterile in a way. So the overheads are also a great example of how this plugin works. Here I have two preamps. I have one before and one after the modules, so I can decide how much I want to drive the EQ and compressors. So let's listen to the overheads without Satson CS first, and then let's engage it. So you heard it's completely different. It's just taking the whole drum kit from the overheads, and it's capable of bringing out the single elements, kick, hi-hat, snare, all of the high frequencies in a great way. So I used the saturation at the beginning, kept it at 0. I'm cranking 15 on 450 to bring in the whole picture of the kit, and I'm actually filtering out 12. But I'm doing 16 kilohertz plus 15. And I'm also bringing up 0.7 at 430. So something about, that high sort of grinding character from the cymbals. And then I'm also going minus 13.9 at 300 Hertz. So I'm taking away all of the maybe rambling from the high parts of the kick and sort of like the lows, low mids of the snare. Then I'm heading into compression, but I'm doing 10-to-1 here, very kind of fast attack at 3 milliseconds and 0.1 release. Then I went into another gain stage module and engaged saturation again. Now let's listen to the kick drum without and with Satson CS. So here I'm pulling up a lot of gain. I wanted plus 18, I went in with the saturation, in with fat mode, and there are some typical SSL EQ tricks. 15 plus 15 dB at 120 Hertz with the 56 Hertz high pass, minus 15 dB at 0.16, so 160 Hertz to get rid of all of the boxiness. Then some point at 3.5 dB, 4.48 kilohertz, and plus 15, 8 kilohertz high shelf. It goes then into a compressor which only uses 10% of its mix knob, but it's a 4-to-1, kind of a fast to medium attack, like 6 milliseconds, which is kind of fast for a kick drum, and a 0.9 release. So all I'm looking for is to have some sort of pillowy kind of sound, kind of a lot of compression and some makeup. But then again, only 10% mixed in. And then we go into yet another preamp module, which has yet again more saturation, even if I'm pulling down at around -3. Now this is a giant of a kick. Now I don't know if I were to mix this song, if I would go this far, if the artist wanted to, but it's an example that proves that the channel strip goes towards that SSL larger than life kind of sound. And now bass. Let's take a listen to it before and after. So let's take a look at what I've done. I have a high pass at 70 Hertz, but then I'm bringing 100 Hertz up 3.3 dBs. And then I'm also adding 2.7 at 300 Hertz to get the famous fingers, of the bass. Then some of the edge and tip is 2.7 at 1 kilohertz 75. And then I'm also adding 4.8 again at 3.39, probably sounding great. Now this high pass at 70 plus the 100 is really the trick that makes the kick drum kind of interact. I'm sort of letting the subs being handled by the kick this time, not by the bass. And you can tell from the mix. Then there's a compressor, which is a 10-to-1 super fast auto release, which is acting as sort of a leveler to the bass itself. So it's kind of a quick and dirty way of doing it, but it worked. So it adds a lot of harmonic content, we saw that, which I'm then bringing in with the over plus 18 dBs of gain compensated saturation with the preamp module. So that's what getting the bass to be consistent and sort of like flowing in the context of the track. Now let's take electric guitars, which are in these middle 8, there's 4 of them playing, actually 6, and on 4 of them I've used Satson CS. So again, before and after. They sound really great. They have more, energy. Again, they're more lively. If you take a look at these modules, you've seen these before. There's a lot of presence at around 1.82. They switch around, some of them at around 1.6, 1.3. They're all different. Sometimes I'm bringing in a little bit more highs with the bell at 7K around there. It's another typical SSL trick. If you could call them tricks, because you just listen to a sound and react to what you want to make with it. But I have to say that there are some sort of traits that the EQ and compressor kind of want you to go for, and they always become very evocative of how these consoles have made records sound, you know, in the ears. There's definitely a part that is technical to the equipment that was used, not just the songwriting and the beautiful songs and, you know, the message and the arrangement and so on and so forth. Here I went for 2-to-1, and all of these guitars are again compressed to around, well, 2 of them aren't, but the others have a 15%. So sometimes I wanted a little bit more of a pillow again under these guitars. Another thing I've done, obviously, is to take the compressor and put it on the mix bus. Why not? It resembles a mix bus compressor, and it's a typical setting in which we would like to use it. So we've been listening to these all along. From this compressor, we go to 2 more EQs in analog outboard. We don't care about them. Let's take a listen, but now without the compressor and then with. You can hear there's a lot of lows because of the sidechain that was at 1 kilohertz. So I'm really bringing in more mojo just with the fact that the detector is working from 1K and above. But how about a more classic setting with maybe auto release, 10 milliseconds attack, and 4-to-1, no sidechain? And it could probably be a stereo link because it's typical of this compressor, and I think it's part of the sound that it has. So dual mono isn't always better, you know. Let's try out this setting and let's find out, you know, if we like it better or not. Now you've heard when I go more to the extremes, it actually sounds wrong the way an SSL sounds. So it sounds right in being wrong. It becomes a little bit squashier, and that's why a lot of people say you shouldn't, which again there's no rule, you shouldn't go past 4. The magical number 4 sets a little bit of a magical area in which records are made, for better or worse. So one thing we haven't worked on is the actual lead vocals. So we could create the lead vocals right now and just, you know, let's shape it from the get-go. Let me bring the compressor back to what it was before. So we have the old original setting, and let me bring in Satson CS. So I'm gonna do it out of context just to risk it, probably. Let's start from the beginning with my initial preset, probably verse, chorus, you know, we'll keep it rolling and see where we end up. 2 preamps and the extremes, 1 EQ, 1 compressor.
But I feel you sometimes. I work like a dog and I save every dime. Still a year or 2 till I see you again. Is it money or decision or just faith in the end? I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come along.
You heard I was mixing the EQ into the compressor. So the compressor was on and it allowed me to kind of contain the energy of my wild moves. That's how I like to sort of work the channel out, but then, you know, you can go back and forth. Let's continue.
But I feel you sometimes. I work like a dog and I save every dime. Still a year or two till I see you again. Is it money or decision or just faith in the end? I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you...
Okay, sounds pretty cool out of context, but does it mean anything? No. Let's hear it in context.
But I feel you sometimes. I work like a dog and I save every dime. Still a year or two till I see you again. Is it money or decision or just faith in the end? I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come along.
So you see what I've done. I needed some kind of parallel compression going on, like something more extreme that could go below, you know, the sort of quieter part of the song. And I just called another module in, set it up, and it works. And it stays within the confined space of this plugin, which is also incredibly cool for recalls and something, you know, like that, which shouldn't be underestimated in today's world of, could you please?
But I feel you sometimes. I work like a dog and I save every dime. Still a year or two till I see you again. Is it money or decision or just faith in the end? I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come along.
I mean, the kick is larger than life, to say the least, but it's great. It's still capable of having so much drive, the whole mix. Nothing is giving up, but they all somehow find a space to live together. Even if nothing is willing to give up, it kind of all works and they all find a space to play together, but with energy and drive, which to me is the memory I have of what SSL has always meant as a brand, as a sort of a sound signature to the mixes. So as usual, I hope that this video was useful to you, maybe gave you ideas on how to EQ, compress, or how to get drive and energy out of a band from singer-songwriter to the best singer-songwriter in the world. So thank you very much for watching. Ciao.